Do you remember the African-American breakfasts our grandparents ate to survive? They kept families strong through hard times made from scraps, faith, and love that stretched farther than money. What did survival taste like then, and what have we lost by forgetting it? Cornmeal mush with syrup was the quiet hero of survival mornings. Grandparents stirred cornmeal into boiling water, whisking until it thickened into a soft, golden porridge that clung to the spoon. It was plain, almost too simple, but it filled bellies when nothing else could. When cane syrup was poured over the top, it transformed into something tender and sweet, a small comfort against hard times. The smell was faint but familiar, warm like a blanket on a cold kitchen table. Some ate it hot, others let it cool and slice it to fry later, crisp on the outside and creamy inside. It was a meal that asked for patience, not ingredients. The syrup shone in the morning light, sticky and rich, turning hardship into flavor. Grandparents called it humble food, but it held dignity in every bite. It reminded families that even the simplest grain could carry love, survival, and pride when stirred by steady hands. Biscuits and molasses turned scarcity into sweetness. When butter ran out and sugar was too expensive, thick molasses became the spread that kept breakfast alive. Grandparents baked biscuits from scratch, using lard instead of butter, rolling and cutting dough on floured tables. The smell of baking bread filled the air, mingling with the earthy scent of molasses waiting in its jar. Each biscuit came out golden, soft on the inside, and ready to soak up that dark, syrupy sweetness. It was a meal that cost almost nothing but tasted like everything. Families sat together, dipping biscuits, talking slow, and savoring the quiet start to their day. The sticky sweetness clung to fingers and memories alike. For those who grew up with little, biscuits and molasses were proof that even poverty could taste rich when shared with love. Fried salt pork and gravy was breakfast born from preservation and patience. Grandparents sliced the cured meat thin, sizzling it in a skillet until the fat turned crisp and fragrant. The salty aroma filled the air, sharp but comforting. The leftover drippings stayed in the pan, thickened with flour and water to make a gravy that stretched across biscuits or grits. It was heavy, hearty, and enough to fuel long days of work. Every piece of pork carried the taste of tradition, food made to last, food that respected every scrap. The gravy was creamy and rich, coating the plate like warmth itself. Children wiped their plates clean with biscuits, unwilling to waste even a drop. It was not fancy, but it was full of care, a reminder that flavor could rise from necessity. In that skillet, hardship turned into something nourishing, something that said, "We made it through another morning." Rice and sugar with evaporated milk was the sweet salvation of the empty pantry. When fresh milk was gone and the cupboard was bare, grandparents turned leftover rice into breakfast magic. A little sugar, a splash of canned milk, and a stir over the stove brought it all together. The smell was soft, like sweetness and hope combined. It was warm and creamy, simple but satisfying, a meal that wrapped the stomach in comfort. Kids loved it because it felt like dessert, even when it was dinner from the night before reborn. Grandparents called it rice pudding without the fuss. It tasted like kindness and invention, like the beauty of never wasting what little you had. It was proof that love and survival could fit in a single bowl. Hot water. Cornbread was the taste of resilience fried golden. Made from cornmeal, salt, and boiling water, it took almost nothing to prepare, just heat, hands, and a little patience. Grandparents mixed it until thick, shaped small patties and dropped them into sizzling oil. The kitchen filled with that sound, soft crackles and promise. The outside crisped brown, the inside stayed tender, and the smell of corn filled the air. Served hot with greens, beans, or on its own, it was both bread and meal. It was the working person's comfort, made quick and eaten proud. No milk, no eggs, no fancy tools, just skill passed down through hands that refused to give up. Each bite was a memory of endurance, of turning a few ingredients into a reason to keep going. Fatback and grits was breakfast built on thrift and grit. The fatback sizzled in the skillet first, releasing its salty aroma as it browned and curled. The grease left behind became gold, seasoning the pot of bubbling grits to perfection. Stirred smooth, thick, and rich, the grits soaked up that savory flavor like a secret only the poor could afford to know. Grandparents served it in bowls, steaming and simple, with crispy bits of fatback on top. It was heavy in the best way, fuel for a long day of labor. There was pride in every bite, the kind of pride that came from making much out of little. Fatback and grits was not just breakfast, it was strength served with a spoon, a southern hymn sung over a hot stove. Sometimes a pat of margarine was dropped on top to melt into the heat, adding a layer of richness that made the bowl glisten. The meal was eaten slow, savoring every spoonful before the workday began. Grandparents said it was food that stuck to your ribs, and they were right. It kept you going long after sunrise. It tasted like memory and perseverance, like something deeper than hunger itself. Redeye gravy and biscuits gave breakfast a bold, bitter soul. Born from ham drippings and black coffee, it was thin, smoky, and sharp enough to wake you faster than any alarm. Grandparents poured the hot coffee into the greasy skillet, scraping the bottom to gather every bit of flavor. The smell hit first, strong, dark, and unmistakable. Fresh biscuits soaked it up like sponges, turning bitter into savory beauty. It was a meal for workers, for those who rose before dawn and needed fire in their bellies. Redeye gravy did not pretend to be sweet or gentle. It was honest, intense, and unforgettable. Grandparents said it was a grown folks' breakfast, the kind that taught you to face the day head on. The flavor was bold, a mix of smoke and bitterness that tasted like life itself, hard, sharp, but satisfying. Every bite carried stories of mornings spent in fields or factories, hands rough but hearts steady. It was more than a meal. It was morning courage in liquid form. Fried apples and bread turned scraps into satisfaction. Old apples, soft and spotted, were sliced and tossed into a pan with sugar, butter, or lard. The smell of caramel and warmth filled the room as they softened and browned. Day-old bread joined the mix, soaking up every drop of syrupy sweetness. It was rich, sweet, and comforting, the kind of meal that made even the poorest kitchens feel rich. Grandparents served it warm, sometimes with a sprinkle of cinnamon if they had it. The taste lingered like kindness itself, proof that waste was never an option when love and patience were in the kitchen. The sizzling sound from the skillet was music, soft, steady, and full of promise. Kids would gather near the stove, waiting for their turn with a fork. Even on the leanest mornings, this dish made the home smell alive. It was food made from nothing but hope, sweetened by care. Leftover rice pancakes were the invention of hungry mornings. Cold rice mixed with flour, egg, and a little sugar turned into batter, then fried into soft golden cakes. They crisped at the edges and steamed in the center, smelling like comfort reborn. Grandparents drizzled syrup or butter over the top, calling it a special breakfast even when it was born from scraps. The pancakes were sweet and tender, their warmth stretching far beyond the plate. Every bite carried gratitude, a quiet celebration of resourcefulness that turned leftovers into joy. The sound of the batter hitting the skillet was soft but sure, like morning routine meeting creativity. The first pancake was always eaten standing at the stove, still hot, still bubbling with syrup. It tasted like invention, like pride disguised as sweetness. It was survival dressed up as a treat, and it never failed to bring a smile. Blackstrap molasses porridge was strong, bitter, and full of life. Grandparents stirred it thick over a slow flame, blending cornmeal, milk, and a spoonful of molasses until it darkened like caramel. The taste was deep, sweet with a bite of iron, a tonic for tired bones and empty cupboards. It was the kind of breakfast that gave strength more than comfort, a reminder that food could heal as much as it could fill. The steam rose slow and sweet, wrapping the room in the scent of perseverance. Each spoonful was medicine disguised as sustenance, a ritual that kept hearts and hands working through the hardest mornings. Some mornings it was thinned with water, other times thick enough to hold a spoon upright. Grandparents ate it quietly, knowing it would carry them through the day. It was survival served in a bowl, humble but powerful, like endurance made edible. Fried bologna and eggs were the kind of breakfast that came from both love and necessity. The skillet hit the stove before the sun came up, its heat waking the house faster than any clock could. Grandparents sliced slits in the edges of the bologna so it would not curl, laying each piece flat to sizzle in the pan. The smell was sharp and smoky, filling the kitchen with a promise that no one would start the day hungry. Once browned and blistered at the edges, the bologna came out and the eggs went in, frying in the same grease for flavor that no oil could match. Some mornings they scrambled them with onions. Other days they fried them hard with crisp edges. Served on white bread or next to grits, it was a meal that filled stomachs and spirits alike. Kids called it breakfast meat, never thinking about how little it cost, just how good it tasted. It was a worker's breakfast, the kind that kept strength in the body and dignity in the home. The bologna might have come from a bargain pack, but when it hit that skillet, it turned into gold. It was not about luxury. It was about knowing how to make something small feel mighty. The sound of grease popping was a morning song, one that told you life might be hard, but you would always eat. Cabbage and onions with cornbread made a humble breakfast that filled both the belly and the heart. When meat was scarce, the skillet became a garden feast. Grandparents chopped cabbage fresh from the yard or the market, tossing it with sliced onions and a bit of lard or grease. The smell that rose from the pan was earthy and warm, like hope frying slow. As it cooked down, the cabbage softened and the onions turned sweet, making a broth rich enough to dip bread into. Cornbread baked in the oven beside it, crusty on top and tender inside. The two came together on the plate, steam rising in quiet grace. It was not fancy, but it was full of care. The kind of meal that kept families going through hard seasons, reminding them that flavor did not come from plenty. It came from patience. Every bite spoke of the land, of effort, and of faith in simple things. The cornbread soaked up the juices, catching every drop like a blessing. In those moments, a table without meat still felt abundant, and no one left hungry. Homemade biscuits with cane syrup were a breakfast of pride, born from hands that worked and loved without rest. Grandparents woke early, sifting flour, cutting in lard, and rolling out dough on wooden tables dusted with years of memory. The smell of baking filled the house, the warmth spilling into every room. When the biscuits came out, golden and steaming, the cane syrup waited nearby, thick and dark as molasses. It poured slow, catching the morning light like honey turned to amber. The sweetness mixed with the salt of the biscuit, creating comfort too deep to describe. It was the kind of meal that made you pause before the first bite, because it tasted like home. Every batch told a story, of mothers who made do, of children who grew up strong on simplicity. There was joy in its repetition, in the rhythm of making something real from so little. The meal said, "We might not have much, but we have each other," and that was enough. The sound of the oven door closing, the clink of a butter knife, the hush that followed the first bite, all of it became part of the morning ritual. That biscuit, soft on the inside and crisp at the edge, carried warmth that lasted long after breakfast ended. It was the taste of love baked daily, patient and proud. Leftover collard greens and rice turned yesterday's dinner into today's survival. Grandparents reheated the greens slowly, letting their smoky flavor return, then folded in cooked rice until everything blended into one soulful dish. The broth turned the rice tender, absorbing all the spice and fat left behind from the pot. It was food with memory. Every bite carried yesterday's work and tomorrow's strength. The greens, once wilted, took on new life beside the soft rice, becoming breakfast that satisfied the hunger of both body and spirit. A drizzle of vinegar added brightness, a reminder that even hardship could taste alive. It was warm, it was nourishing, and it was never wasted. Families gathered around small tables, thankful that nothing from the night before went forgotten. In the quiet clatter of spoons and bowls, there was gratitude for every grain, every leaf, every bite that kept them moving forward. Some mornings, the pot would bubble again with new life, stretching the last of the greens just a little further. The meal wasn't just food, it was testimony, proof that nothing humble ever truly disappeared. It carried lessons of endurance, teaching that the best things often came from what was left behind. Sweet potato biscuits brought sunshine into the morning, their golden color glowing like joy itself. Grandparents mashed leftover sweet potatoes into flour, sugar, and a bit of lard, turning scraps into softness. The dough came together with care, rolled out and cut by hand before baking to perfection. The smell that drifted from the oven was sweet, nutty, and full of promise. When pulled apart, the biscuits were tender and bright, sweetened naturally by the potato. No jam was needed, just warmth, butter if it was there, and the pride of making something beautiful from leftovers. Kids would eat them fast, the edges still too hot to touch. It was breakfast that felt like celebration, even on the poorest days. Every bite reminded the family that sweetness could grow from hardship, that nothing given by the earth ever went to waste. The color of the biscuits looked like morning sunlight captured in bread form, glowing against the gray of lean years. Every soft bite spoke of love and cleverness, proof that even scraps could bloom into something whole. It was a kind of quiet victory, one baked, not bought, and shared with joy. Crackling bread was the sound and taste of tradition. Grandparents saved every pork scrap from butchering, frying them down until crisp. Those cracklings, salty and rich, were folded into cornbread batter that sizzled when it hit the skillet. The smell was deep, smoky, and warm, like comfort made edible. When it came out of the oven, the bread was golden brown, with crunchy bites hidden in every corner. It was heavy but satisfying, each piece holding the spirit of thrift and endurance. Families gathered around to eat it hot, breaking it apart with their hands. It was the kind of food that stretched a meal, that turned a handful of cornmeal and scraps into something filling and proud. Crackling bread was heritage baked into every crumb, a reminder that even the hardest times could taste good when shared together. The sound of the crust cracking filled the kitchen, mingling with laughter and the hum of stories passed down through generations. Every bite carried the memory of hard work, of families who found a way to turn survival into celebration. Served with greens or beans, it stood as proof that nothing from the land was wasted. In that bread lived history, care, and the soul of a people who made every meal mean something. Cornbread and buttermilk was breakfast born of simplicity and strength. Grandparents crumbled leftover cornbread into bowls, poured cold buttermilk over the top, and stirred until soft and thick. It was tangy, creamy, and filling, the perfect meal when cupboards were bare. The sourness of the buttermilk balanced the sweetness of the bread, making each bite taste new again. It was food that cooled the body in summer, soothed it in winter, and satisfied hunger all year long. No stove, no fuss, just ingredients that were always on hand. It was eaten with a spoon, quiet and steady, often in the same bowls used for supper. There was nothing fancy about it, but it carried the wisdom of generations: never waste, never want. It was a poor person's breakfast, yes, but one made with pride. Some folks added a pinch of salt or a drizzle of syrup, but it never needed more than it had. The clinking of spoons and the sound of quiet chewing told stories of endurance and contentment. In a world that asked for more, this humble meal taught gratitude for what was already there. Grits and scrambled eggs were the foundation of the Southern morning. Grandparents stirred the grits slow, keeping them smooth and thick while eggs cooked soft and golden beside them. The smell of butter, salt, and heat filled the air, a smell that meant the day was beginning right. The two foods shared a plate, one creamy, one fluffy, both symbols of care. It was quick, affordable, and enough to keep the family full until noon. Sometimes a slice of bacon or a spoon of gravy joined the dish, but even plain, it felt whole. This was the meal of workers, of early risers and hopeful hearts. Every bite was steady, warm, and simple. a reminder that the best things in life often came from the smallest pots. The rhythm of whisking grits and scrambling eggs was morning music, soft and sure. It was eaten before the day's labor began, giving strength and calm in equal measure. Each bowl held a quiet promise that even in struggle, comfort could always be found at the table. Rice and fatback gravy turned scraps into satisfaction. The fatback sizzled first, crisping into deep flavor as the grease melted down. Grandparents added flour, then water, whisking until the gravy thickened and darkened to perfection. Poured over rice, it became a meal that was cheap but felt rich. The salt from the fatback gave life to every grain, the smell strong enough to bring everyone to the kitchen. It was the kind of breakfast that didn't need talking, just eating, slow and thankful. It stretched what little there was, filling the air with warmth and the stomach with peace. Every spoonful told a story of survival through skill and patience. Sometimes the gravy was made with leftover drippings from the night before, deepened with onion or pepper if they had it. Grandparents said the secret was in the stirring, slow, steady, and full of intention. Each bite was a memory of endurance, a reminder that flavor was born from effort, not wealth. Cane syrup toast was sweetness for hard times. When butter ran out and sugar was gone, grandparents made syrup from cane or brown sugar water, simmered until thick. They spread it over hot bread, watching it soak into every crumb. It was simple, sticky, and sweet enough to feel like dessert even when it was breakfast. The syrup clung to fingers, the bread soft and warm. It was a small joy, a reminder that sweetness could always be found, even in struggle. That first bite tasted like love disguised as survival, and for many, it was the best part of the morning. The syrup dripped slow, shining under morning light, while kids licked it from their hands and laughed. It was a moment of delight before a long day, proof that life's smallest blessings could still feel grand. Every bite carried the taste of resilience, turning scarcity into sweetness. Stewed apples with cinnamon and lard were the warmth of winter mornings in the South. Grandparents would peel the apples by hand, their fingers quick and sure, tossing each slice into an iron pot that hissed when the fat hit the heat. A spoonful of lard went first. There was no butter to spare, melting into a glossy pool that would coat every piece of fruit. Sugar was added if there was any to be found, but most times the sweetness came from the apples themselves, coaxed out by patience and low flame. Cinnamon or nutmeg, if there was some hidden in the back of the cupboard, turned the smell into something magical. The apples softened slowly, curling into tender ribbons that glowed like amber. The air filled with a warmth that made even the poorest kitchen feel rich. Served over biscuits or eaten plain from a bowl, it was the kind of meal that made children quiet with joy. It cost almost nothing but felt like everything. Grandparents said it was food for the soul, and they were right. It soothed hunger, calmed hearts, and brought everyone closer to the table. Even when times were lean, stewed apples with lard reminded families that comfort could be made from what was already there. It wasn't just breakfast, it was love made visible through steam and sugar. Sorghum syrup biscuits were the sweet glue of country mornings, simple yet divine. Grandparents mixed flour, lard, and milk, cutting the dough by hand and baking it until the tops turned golden. While the biscuits rose, the sorghum syrup sat warming on the stove, thick, dark, and sticky as the sun coming up. Sorghum was cheaper than sugar and easier to find, made from local cane that families often grew themselves. When the biscuits came out, steaming and soft, a drizzle of syrup transformed them into luxury. The smell filled the room, earthy, rich, and pure. Kids licked their fingers, and adults smiled quietly, knowing this was a taste of home. The syrup clung to the edges of the biscuits, turning every bite into a memory. It was breakfast, dessert, and comfort all at once. Even on hard days, sorghum biscuits gave sweetness without waste. They were the pride of the Southern table, humble, homemade, and healing. Fried fish and grits made weekends feel like a holiday, even when money was short. The fish came from local rivers, catfish, perch, or whiting, caught with care and cleaned at dawn. Grandparents seasoned the fillets with salt, pepper, and cornmeal before dropping them into hot grease. The sizzle filled the air, mingling with laughter and the bubbling sound of grits cooking nearby. Those grits, thick and creamy, waited patiently for the fish to finish. When both came together on the plate, it was magic. Crispy, tender fish resting beside buttery grits that tasted like the earth itself. Sometimes hot sauce joined the mix, or a slice of white bread to catch every crumb. It was a meal of pride and purpose, proof that even poverty could hold celebration. The river provided the food. The kitchen turned it into love. Fried fish and grits were a reminder that wealth wasn't always counted in dollars. It was measured in moments shared around a steaming plate. Cornmeal pancakes were the breakfast that never failed to satisfy. When flour ran low, grandparents reached for cornmeal, mixing it with water, a pinch of salt, and whatever fat they had saved. The batter was thick and hearty, poured into a skillet greased with bacon drippings or lard. Each pancake came out golden and crisp at the edges, with a dense, warm center that held the taste of home. Syrup, molasses, or even a sprinkle of sugar made them sweet, but they were just as good plain. The smell of frying cornmeal filled the house, comforting and familiar, the sound of a day beginning right. Kids gathered around the table, forks ready, while grandparents flipped each one with practiced rhythm. Cornmeal pancakes were more than breakfast. They were survival turned soft and golden. In every bite was a story of making do, of turning simple things into something you could be proud to serve. Oatmeal with evaporated milk made plain oats taste like luxury. Grandparents boiled the oats slow, stirring with patience until thick and creamy. A splash of evaporated milk turned it rich, giving it sweetness and body even without sugar. Sometimes a little butter melted in, swirling gold into gray. The smell was gentle, warm, milky, and kind. It filled hungry bellies and comforted tired hearts, especially on cold mornings when heat was scarce. The milk, thick and silky from the can, gave the oatmeal a flavor that felt indulgent in a time when little else was. Kids didn't always know it was a cheaper meal. They just knew it tasted good. For families who had to stretch every dollar, oatmeal with evaporated milk was proof that care mattered more than cost. Each spoonful was slow and satisfying, carrying love in every bite. It was breakfast made to last, and to remind you that small comforts could still feel grand. Smoked herring and rice was the ocean's gift to the southern kitchen. The herring came salted and cured, strong enough to scent the air even before cooking. Grandparents soaked it first, softening its bite, then fried it in a pan until the edges curled and crisped. The fish went over hot rice, its smoky oil dripping down like seasoning. The meal was bold, salty, rich, and unforgettable. For those who lived near the coast, it was a taste of home and history, connecting generations through flavor. The smell might have been sharp, but it spoke of sustenance and pride. Smoked herring and rice was food that filled the stomach and lingered on the soul. It reminded everyone that humble ingredients could build mighty traditions. Every plate told the same story of struggle, resourcefulness, and the sea's generosity, carried into the kitchen with faith and fire. The salt of the fish met the warmth of the rice in perfect rhythm, a balance of sea and soil. Sometimes a splash of hot sauce or a side of cornbread completed the plate, making something humble feel whole. Even long after breakfast was done, the scent stayed, a memory of mornings when families found strength in what they had and gratitude in what they shared. Potato hash with onions and peppers was the morning's miracle made from scraps. Grandparents diced leftover boiled potatoes, tossing them into a skillet slick with grease. Onions and peppers joined next, sizzling until soft and golden. The smell rose up, sweet, smoky, and alive. Salt and pepper did the rest, no fancy spices needed. The potatoes crisped at the edges, turning brown and crunchy while the center stayed soft. Served hot with eggs or bread, it filled the room with satisfaction. It was the kind of meal that looked humble but felt whole. You could feed a family on it, stretch it for another day, or serve it proudly on Sunday. Potato hash with onions and peppers was proof that waste didn't exist in a wise kitchen. Every bit could be reborn, every leftover turned into something loved. Sometimes sausage or fatback joined the pan, adding depth and flavor, but the dish never needed more than care. It carried the rhythm of home, the steady scrape of a spatula, the pop of oil, the warmth of shared hunger met with love. Homemade syrup biscuits were the dessert of lean times, a sweetness that came from patience, not price. The biscuits were soft and warm, baked from scratch on mornings when life felt heavy. Grandparents made syrup by simmering brown sugar and water together until it bubbled thick like honey. The smell alone could lift a tired heart. When poured over hot biscuits, the syrup soaked in, glistening like amber. Kids would press their fingers into the bread, catching the drips before they cooled. It was sticky, messy, and wonderful. A treat that felt special even without anything store-bought. Homemade syrup biscuits turned necessity into celebration, a tradition passed through generations. Each bite tasted like care, sweetened by the effort it took to make something from nothing. The syrup shimmered in the morning light, a small reminder that sweetness could survive even in struggle. Every plate carried comfort, laughter, and the quiet joy of making the most out of little. Grease bread was breakfast in its most honest form. When butter was a luxury, saved bacon grease became treasure. Grandparents spread it on hot toast, letting it melt and soak through the crust. A sprinkle of salt, maybe a touch of sugar, turned it into something rich and savory. It was the taste of survival, simple, humble, and unforgettable. Grease bread carried warmth to cold mornings and comfort to long days. It was proof that waste had no place in a smart kitchen. Even the drippings from yesterday's pan had a second life, turning dry bread into something golden. Every bite held a quiet kind of dignity, the flavor of perseverance and pride. Sometimes the grease was seasoned with bits of onion or pepper, deepening the taste. It was the flavor of memory, a whisper from the stove that said, "You will be all right as long as you have bread and a little grease." Fried corn and onions with grits was a skillet breakfast that felt like sunshine in a bowl. Corn kernels popped and sizzled in bacon grease, mixing with chopped onions that browned slow and sweet. The scent filled the air, earthy and inviting. When spooned over hot grits, the mixture created a perfect balance, sweet, salty, creamy, and crisp. Grandparents called it country gold, a dish that could feed many with little. It was hearty, colorful, and full of life. Each spoonful brought together the garden and the stove, the land and the table. Fried corn and onions with grits wasn't just breakfast, it was heritage served hot. It told the story of people who turned simplicity into art, one skillet at a time. Some mornings, a sprinkle of pepper or a spoonful of milk joined the pot, turning the humble bowl into something close to sacred. It was a reminder that even in scarcity, flavor, love, and hope never ran out. Sweet potato coffee cake was a breakfast that carried warmth, thrift, and community in every slice. Families would mash leftover sweet potatoes into the batter, seasoning it with cinnamon, nutmeg, and sometimes cloves before baking it in heavy cast-iron pans that gave it a perfect crust. The result was moist and spiced, with a natural sweetness that came not from sugar, but from the potatoes themselves, making it both healthy and filling. It was often served at church gatherings or Sunday breakfasts when a little something special was needed on the table to bring people together. The dish reflected African American traditions of stretching what was available into something memorable, proving that nothing went to waste in kitchens where creativity was survival. Sweet potatoes were plentiful and affordable, making them an easy way to feed a family while also adding vitamins and nourishment to the meal. The cake was often paired with coffee, hot milk, or even molasses drinks, making it a centerpiece of mornings that were simple yet comforting. Though it is rarely baked today, this coffee cake once carried generations through hard times and sweet mornings alike, leaving memories of warmth, family, and resilience with every bite. Raisin bread pudding with vanilla sauce was proof that nothing in the kitchen went to waste. stale bread became a canvas for transformation, soaked in milk, sweetened, and brought to life again. Raisins added richness, plumping up in the heat until they burst with syrupy sweetness. The pudding baked slowly, filling the air with the smell of nutmeg and brown sugar. And then came the best part. The vanilla sauce, smooth and glossy, poured over the warm pudding like kindness itself. This dish carried the rhythm of old kitchens, where creativity was the difference between scarcity and abundance. At Christmas, it was often served as the grand finale, simple yet deeply satisfying. Every spoonful was soft, comforting, and impossibly nostalgic. It was more than a way to stretch ingredients. It was a way to stretch joy. Record player gift reveals were pure magic, the kind that made Christmas morning unforgettable. The wrapping paper tore slowly at first, then all at once, revealing a shiny new turntable gleaming in the light. For many families, it was the most prized gift beneath the tree. Fathers hooked it up with care, mothers brought out their best vinyl, and soon the house filled with sound. Stevie Wonder, Nat King Cole, and Aretha spun through the room as everyone danced barefoot in their pajamas. Music had a way of uniting generations. Elders swayed, kids twirled, and nobody wanted to turn it off. That first crackle of the needle was the true start of the holiday. Record players weren't just gifts, they were time machines, spinning joy into every corner of the home. Ground kudzu root paste emerged when conventional flours were scarce and starchy substitutes were needed to thicken stews or stretch breads. Kudzu, an invasive vine introduced from Asia, sent deep roots into the southern soil that stored abundant starch. Enslaved gatherers dug these roots, washed and dried them, then pounded them into a fine powder. Mixed with water, the powder formed a paste that thickened soups or acted as a binder for cornmeal cakes. Its mild flavor and reliable texture made it a quiet but important ingredient in times of scarcity. After emancipation, some rural families continued to harvest kudzu for its starch, and today herbalists still value it for its medicinal qualities. Ground kudzu root paste shows how knowledge of local plants and persistence in foraging allowed cooks to replace costly ingredients with what the land freely offered, turning an aggressive vine into a vital pantry staple, and demonstrating again how necessity inspired both culinary creativity and a deeper understanding of the southern landscape's hidden gifts. Sweet potato biscuits brought sunshine to winter mornings. Their orange glow peeked from the oven, warm and soft with a buttery crust that crumbled at the touch. They were made from mashed sweet potatoes, one of the most treasured ingredients in African American kitchens, valued for their sweetness, their earthiness, and their ability to stretch a meal. On Christmas mornings, these biscuits were stacked high beside grits, eggs, or fried apples, brushed with melted butter or drizzled with honey. They smelled like the start of a good day. In times when sugar was scarce, the natural sweetness of the potato did all the work. Kneaded by hand and baked in cast-iron skillets, they carried the weight of care in every fold. Grandmothers taught children how to press the dough without overworking it, whispering small lessons about patience, family, and food as love. These biscuits weren't fancy, but they made every breakfast feel special. They were proof that beauty didn't need perfection, just heart, warmth, and a little time. Every batch was a promise that something good always waited at the table. Sweet potato biscuits didn't just feed families, they connected them. Catfish and grits turned holiday mornings into celebration. Grandparents cleaned and seasoned each fillet with salt, pepper, and cornmeal before lowering it gently into hot oil. The fish crackled and hissed, the air thick with the smell of golden perfection. Grits cooked slow beside it, creamy and patient, waiting for the fish to crown the bowl. A pat of butter melted on top, running down like sunshine. It was a meal that carried pride, a taste of the South at its finest. The crisp of the catfish met the smooth comfort of the grits, rich and humble all at once. Families gathered around the table, laughing, praying, and passing plates. It wasn't fancy, it was full. Every bite was gratitude, every crumb a memory. Catfish and grits were proof that simple food could carry the weight of joy, tradition, and love in equal measure. Vinegar pie was the miracle no one saw coming. Born out of scarcity, it turned the simplest pantry staples into something unexpectedly elegant. When lemons were too costly or unavailable, vinegar stepped in, its sharpness softened by sugar and butter until it became a tangy custard pie unlike anything else. African-American cooks perfected this balance between frugality and flavor, making do without ever losing touch with creativity. The first bite was sweet, then bright, then comforting, the kind of taste that made you pause just to appreciate it. Vinegar pie was proof that the best recipes often come from necessity, not abundance. During Christmas, when families stretched every dollar and every ingredient, this pie brought a sense of pride and accomplishment. It didn't glitter like a fancy dessert, but it didn't need to. It was a triumph in disguise, a humble, golden masterpiece born from ingenuity. Christmas morning radio shows were the heartbeat of early celebrations before the world turned digital. DJs with warm voices greeted neighborhoods still half asleep, blending gospel tracks with holiday greetings from local families. Static hummed between songs, and that sound itself felt like home. Mothers cooked breakfast to Mahalia Jackson while fathers tuned the dial, nodding along. Children called in to shout, "Merry Christmas" live on air, their excitement cutting through the noise. It wasn't just music, it was connection, a community linked by airwaves and love. Radios crackled in kitchens and cars alike, carrying the same songs to every listener who needed them. Goosefoot seed meal offered vital nourishment when cultivated grains were scarce or too costly. Goosefoot, also known as lamb's quarters, grew abundantly along field edges and yielded tiny seeds rich in protein and minerals. Enslaved harvesters shook the plants over cloths to collect the seeds, then winnowed and ground them into a fine flour. This flour could be cooked into hot cereal, mixed with cornmeal for bread, or used to thicken stews, providing a surprisingly hearty alternative to purchased grain. The practice drew on both African and indigenous traditions of using wild seeds as staple foods. Even after emancipation, rural families in parts of the Midwest and Appalachia continued to gather goosefoot seeds for their high nutritional value. Modern interest in quinoa, which is a close relative, echoes this old wisdom. Goosefoot seed meal stands as a reminder that careful attention to the landscape and patient handwork could turn what many considered weeds into a dependable source of strength and nourishment that kept families fed through the hardest seasons. Molasses pound cake was the kind of dessert that lived in memory long after the last crumb was gone. It was heavy in the hand, rich in flavor, and spiced with cinnamon, ginger, and cloves, made for cold evenings when the scent of baking was enough to warm the whole house. Molasses stood in for sugar when sugar was too dear, and it gave the cake its deep brown color and caramel soul. The batter, thick and fragrant, was poured into worn loaf pans that had seen a lifetime of holidays. When it emerged from the oven, the crust glistened, slightly sticky, like honey touched by smoke. African-American families passed this recipe through generations, often written in fading ink on the backs of church bulletins or tucked inside cookbooks. It wasn't just dessert, it was preservation. The flavor was bold and comforting, sweet without being showy, a reflection of the people who made it. Served with a glass of milk or a drizzle of cream, it carried history in every bite. Molasses pound cake wasn't about extravagance, it was about memory, about keeping sweetness alive even when times were lean. In that way, it wasn't just cake, it was resilience baked golden. Fried catfish and cornbread was a breakfast plate that reflected the abundance of rivers and the skill of African-American cooks in the South. Catfish could be caught at little cost, cleaned, coated in cornmeal, and fried crisp in cast-iron skillets. Paired with hot cornbread fresh from the oven, the meal was both hearty and nourishing. It gave workers the energy needed for long days in the fields, and children the strength to get through school without hunger. Families often made it on weekends when fishing provided enough to share with neighbors, turning it into a communal meal. The taste was bold and rustic, with a combination of crunchy fish and soft bread that defined comfort. Though fish is not often associated with breakfast today, fried catfish and cornbread once stood proudly on morning tables. It remains a reflection of resilience and resourcefulness, showing how nature and tradition came together to sustain communities. Which of these breakfasts filled your table? Comment below, like the video, and subscribe for more memories that still taste like home.